Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. We are thrilled to welcome you to Selling Life Sciences webinar today, featuring two brilliant panelists with complementary backgrounds to talk about the key challenges around selling in life sciences and the changing customer conversation, one that's going beyond a clinical focus. Here at Insight Revenue, we conduct research to understand how high performers succeed in ways that their peers can replicate. We do this because the sales environment is constantly changing, and we use that research to build training and tools to help commercial teams have better, more business-focused conversations with their buyers. And it's that research that we've done that will inform today's conversation. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves more fully, but today we're joined by Kristen Eisenhauer, the Chief Commercial Officer for Charles Rivers Labs, and Pinder Sahota, most recently at Novo Nordisk, but a life sciences leader based out of the UK. We're excited for them to share their perspectives, not only on our latest research, but what they are seeing and how they are responding to the changes. Our discussion today will be led by Timur Hicyilmaz, co-founder of Insight Revenue and lead researcher, and author of the paper Selling Life Sciences that will be referenced during today's conversation. So I'll let everybody introduce themselves, and then I'll turn it over to Timur. Pinder, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you, Becky, and hello, I'm Pinder Sahota. I've been very fortunate to have a career in the life sciences industry. Recently, I was GM for Novo Nordisk UK, but I've also worked for companies like AstraZeneca and GSK in regional, global, and local roles. Delighted to be part of the panel.
And I'm Kristen Eisenhauer. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Charles River Laboratories, a non-clinical CRO, contract research organization. I've been with Charles River for about 25 years now. Had a couple small jobs before that, right after college, but most of my career has been here at Charles River, where I oversee the commercial sales and marketing organization.
Wow, brilliant. Well, thank you both. I have some prepared remarks for you, and I'll use those to ask some questions. An easy one to start with, and it's the reason why we do a lot of research, is we find the world of sales is constantly changing. Buyer requirements change, what you do changes, and it's in constant flux. Life sciences, I think, is particularly interesting at this point in time. We see a lot of things evolving, and so organizations are having to evolve in reaction to that. In conversations with people, we heard some of the following things. A lot of the conversation has tended to be around sort of digital AI. It's hard to walk into a conversation without some strong opinions on what this might mean. For Western countries, people have told us the expectation is that governments will probably look to further constrain spend. Healthcare spend has gone up, high single digits pretty much everywhere around the world. There's a sense that nobody can quite pay for that. That has some major implications. Interest rates, at least in the US, are higher than they have been. That has impact on funding. And then mainly, maybe in the US, regulatory requirements are also in flux, and some of those things change the way behaviors change. So my first question, really, to both of you is, how do you see this impact the people you work with, both internally, but also in terms of the people who would buy your products and services?
Sure. Shall I go first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Okay. I think the themes absolutely resonate, and certainly from a UK and perhaps slightly European basis, the rising cost of healthcare, I think, is a real big one. Seeing population changes and the healthcare demands, elderly population, seeing a rise of obesity, diabetes, and other chronic conditions are having a massive impact on healthcare costs, and that really then is making buyers look very carefully at the value beyond just the clinical features, I guess. What is the value that the product or solution offers? So I think as organizations, really focusing on the value and the evidence behind that, I think is becoming increasingly important. And and procurement teams were professional. They're even better. And with all the data and analytics, they're looking at variations, they're looking at consistencies, departmental budgets, and so on. So I think the pressures are a massive one there. So that's the big one coming over to me. But maybe Kristen, you want to chip in there as well.
Yeah, certainly I agree with everything you said, Pinder. And because we're providing services to, life sciences world, including, biotech and pharma, we are a reflection, right, of our customers. So whatever problems our customers are having certainly become our problems. So indeed, I agree with the rising cost of healthcare is obviously influencing some of the regulatory requirements, some of the legislation that's going on, particularly in the U.S. And so all of those are creating headwinds for our customers, which then becomes our headwind.
And I was curious, like, is there anything here that's sort of new or that you hadn't seen before? That's driving some unforeseen customer behaviors.
I don't think it's necessarily new. I think it's the emphasis over time that's increased because of the pressures. And so if I linked into rising cost of health, and maybe not certainly the UK regulatory requirement, but it's certainly more greater adherence to formularies, the greater reliance of evidence behind products that are coming to the market, whether they be medical devices or pharmaceuticals. And so I think I think it's intensified. Clearly, digital and AI has been more emergent, and we're seeing the healthcare sector use digital and AI in very different ways for managing patients. And it also, I think, we've got to think about where we have products where there's a digital component. How do we land that into the ecosystem of a healthcare system? And whilst some of our digital offerings may give us some data snapshot, it's sitting in an infrastructure that's more longitudinal. So maybe that's something that we really got to adapt to and think about how the implications of the digital solution and the data it generates for healthcare systems.
Yeah, and
that one we've heard from a couple of people.
I would add to that as well.
Kristen.
That I think a lot of the changes that are happening a little quicker right now are causing a little bit of nervousness and uncertainty. I think that's maybe, if I had to point something out that was maybe slightly new, but I think also AI is also something that makes people nervous, right? Nobody's really sure, how is this really going to impact us? Is it safe? Do I believe it? How do we use it? How are people using it against me or for me? So I think that's adding also to a little bit of nervousness that's currently in the market.
No, it's a great segue to our next discussion point, really around sort of trustworthiness, and which is the sort of anxiety will tend to make people trust people less. So this is some data we've collected. It is candidly across industries, does include life sciences as well, but it's more cross industry. And the question was, we asked both sellers and buyers some questions around how trustworthy or not they found certain assertions and promises made by buyers and by sellers. And I think it tells a good story. The interesting thing is both buyers and sellers, by and large, do actually trust promises around functionality, performance, service, all the sort of hard measurable internal things. But where it gets really interesting is this sort of dramatic drop in trust, and not only on the part of buyers, actually, around promises that are made around ROI on the business case. So will this thing I'm looking to buy actually improve my broader business? And I think it tells a story insofar as it also tells me a lot about why I think so many conversations revert back to, unambiguous facts and promises, specs and functionality around different products and services. But more interestingly, perhaps I'd love to get both your thoughts on this. If you've seen this and if you've been able to do anything to counteract it. Kristen, maybe start with you this time.
Yeah, so it's very interesting indeed, and it's kind of points to the the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. That you can say all these things, but are you really going to do it? And then I'm going to get the benefit that you said that you were going to deliver. And I'm not surprised as much that topic in regards to the seller is also somewhat lower, because oftentimes the delivery of the service or the product and that ROI is sometimes out of their hands, right? Most of the time out of their hands. And so that, creates a little uncertainty as well of, are we going to actually produce what we said we were going to? But I think, in a world where we just talked about, some digital and AI, I think actual personal conversations and touch points and that level of trust is going to become increasingly important given all those external factors, and the ability to deliver what you say you're going to deliver is going to be ultimately the determination of if they're going to buy again.
Yeah, let me build on that. I agree with Kristen in terms of the confidence around, are you able to deliver what you say you do? Because sometimes, we will do the clinical trials behind a particular product, and then you land it in a real life situation, and for various reasons it may not perform the same. But I'm a bit surprised as to the seller's confidence on the ROI. So I think what that underlines for me is not only the data that companies generate in a clinical setting, in a trial phase, but the need for data in a real world setting to really understand how does it perform. And so I think that's one implication for me. The other one being, you can choose to ignore this, or you can choose to do something about it. And what I mean by that is, not many times do we sell something into an organization or a healthcare system, and then do we follow up on the return on investment? For the various reasons, because we don't perfectly control the environment it's landed in, and there may be many reasons why it may go wrong. Now, if you choose to ignore it, then the next time round, does that trust go because you didn't quite deliver what you said you did? But if you choose to engage in that conversation, at least you can then be part of the debate that's happening around the ROI. And maybe you can help address some of the factors that may have decreased the ROI. So I think it's a really interesting point in terms of that post-purchase reassurance. What are we doing to that, to help with that, when spend in these areas can be multi-million pound, dollar, euro spends? And it's not always feasible to do it in every locality, but maybe we can do it in some localities.
One question for both of you, especially life science specific. You hear a lot right now around sort of a replication crisis, right? Which is so not everything you do works exactly the way you would do every time you would do it. But if you look deeper into it, I don't think most people conducting those studies would never have said, like, this isn't like gravity. It's always going to work at this speed. There's always going to be a range. Have we undermined ourselves a little bit by not being more upfront about like the range of outcomes you might expect? Is there anything to that?
I think you're right, and because the range isn't always studied, unless in a clinical trial setting, you can give the range, I guess. It's just the confidence there. Well, what is that range? But I do think there's a pragmatism that's required of what it might be like, and sometimes products perform better in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and I think we have seen certainly in the life sciences pharmaceutical sector, spend on real world evidence, increase sharply over, the last 10, maybe 15 years or so. And the data sets are so rich now that they can be interrogated and looked at, and greater emphasis perhaps needs to be put in this area.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also, I think sometimes sellers can be afraid to bring up what could happen, as it may be misunderstood
Right.
as a weakness or a chance that, we're not going to deliver on what we're promising. So I think it's a delicate balance, right, to be realistic. And I think it is our job to educate customers who may not be aware of, the ability to reproduce or not reproduce what's happening, and the fact that this is live science and sometimes things don't go to plan. Right? I think it is our responsibility to point that out, but I think you have to walk that fine line of bringing that up but sounding confident in your ability to deliver still.
Right. Yeah. You want to look. You want to acknowledge the potential, but not literally make that the conversation.
Exactly.
In terms of trust, one of the reasons why we think the gap exists is and we see this again. This is cross industry. Is we think that sellers consistently underestimate the number of buyers who are involved. So this is some data we got from the same study. Buyers, interestingly, say they typically, that it's typically it's 6 point something people who are involved in a purchase. Gartner would actually have a higher number. I think for life sciences in general, the number is much, much higher. But the interesting thing to me was the sellers consistently, they think it's a much smaller number. And our hypothesis was, so there is a trust gap, partly because we haven't actually engaged some of the important people around the purchase whom we never really talk to. And so, again, wanted to get your thoughts on this and hear a little bit about how you might be remedying for this if you are.
Yeah, I think this is a really great slide to show that there are a lot of people in the background, right, that are chiming in on the buying journey and what's important. And I think it's always a great question to ask somebody who you're selling to, who all is involved in the buying process here, and are you the decision maker? I think sometimes people are uncomfortable asking those questions, but I think it's important that you do, because likely you're going to have different stakeholders representing different points of view that you're going to want to hit on all of those, right? And I think in particular, what I'm noticing is that more and more there's more of a financial or procurement eye to a lot of the buying process that there wasn't maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And that's because all the dollars and pounds and euros count these days, right? So I've certainly seen an increase in the amount of financial point of view in the buying journey.
I'd agree with Kristen's comment. I think it has become more complex. Years ago, when I grew up in sales, it was primarily the clinician who was the person that I sold to, and increasingly we're seeing procurement teams a greater voice. We're also seeing nursing staff, heads of nursing, have a role to play on certain treatments or devices. So I think it's become more complex, and if you're an experienced seller in a particular geography, there's a lot of strengths to having that experience, because the geography, people. But sometimes experienced sellers also stick with who they've known in the past. And I've certainly been guilty of that in my career in selling. And you don't keep up to speed with who else is coming along, what else has changed, what new committee, or what's been the changes on a particular committee or formulary. And keeping up to speed with personnel changes and influencers is really paramount. And I think it's a bit of a team exercise, this is, because you will have a seller, you'll have market access people, clinical people in a geography, and building up that local knowledge and mapping who are the decision makers, stakeholders, are they still there? They may have moved
Right.
on. People, get promoted. People move geographies and so on. So it's a constant live conversation. I think we need to have and make sure the network we fully understand it and can really understand decision makers and key influencers.
And certainly when we work with clients, we actually find one of the persistent gaps, honestly, is sort of one, it's having a sense of who the stakeholders are, but then I think it's making some assumptions, like some unwarranted assumptions about how it's going to replicate across similar sounding institutions. And my sense is that's especially dangerous in life sciences. Especially if you're selling like a hospital, for example. The example I use, there aren't that many health systems that I think are genuine systems in a sense that they are, run out of a center. They'd all follow the same pathways. They'd all sort of, treat a patient who has one thing in the same way, irrespective of location. And so I see a lot of people walking into that particular trap. What do you see?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Timur. We think healthcare systems. Let's take a hospital in this example. If we've got a campaign, selling messages that it's going to be the same for every particular locality. These are systems, and they vary from some might be in deprived areas, some might be more affluent areas. The population mix from an ethnicity point of view may be very different. The dynamics between, say, the clinicians and the procurement teams may be very different. So the need to understand the local systems is really, really important. From not only the budgetary constraints right through to the politics as well.
Right.
And I think when great sellers get to that, they can understand how that system ticks and varies from maybe the one down the road as well. Because then they know in what context they're landing their particular product or solution.
Kristen, how does that look in your world?
Yeah, very, very similar in that, no two systems or companies or clients are alike. And even within a company, right, different departments can have different ways, different buying regulations, around that. So I think it's incredibly important to understand, right, the environment that you are selling in, and just and also to remind yourself that the person who is responsible for the purchase probably wants help and needs help, and however you can make that buying journey easier for them internally, right, to make sure all their stakeholders are on board, will certainly garner positive results for you as well. So when you're asking, who are the other people involved in the buying journey, you can follow that up with to say, and what are the things that are important to them that you think I can, make sure I cover so that, their concerns are answered as well. So it's very similar in that I think, it's just every buying journey is somewhat unique, and it's the seller's job to get as much detail as possible about who's involved.
Yeah. So what's your sense of what stops people from asking that? Like something like, last time you bought this kind of thing, what happened? Then that alone would probably tell you an awful lot.
That's a great way, I think, to ask it, because I think sometimes when you say who else is involved in the buying journey, you don't want to make it sound like the person who you're talking to doesn't have the authority to make the decision, right? And sometimes that can feel uncomfortable. But, really it's just about, again, trying to make their job easy of, making sure that all the questions have been answered. But I really like that way, Timur, of just saying, on the last time you had to make a decision like this, whether you were involved or not, how did that go? And what went well, what went wrong? That's a great way, I think, to frame it.
But I'd also, I totally agree with that. It for the seller, it needs sort of constantly to sort of, and a selling team, should I say, because I think for some products and geographies, this is a bit of a team effort, I think. Yeah. You do need that constant curiosity and to really look out for, who's really going to make a decision or be an influencer. And, I remember one of my previous roles, we launched quite a very innovative cardiology product. And in one hospital, the seller was convinced that the head of the department, a professor, was the key person, right? And had a lot of positive signals from the professor of cardiology at this particular hospital. Things didn't move. And end of the day, there were other people who were having an influence and a say. That it took a long time for us to understand that. So had that curiosity been there at the start to understand, well, actually, is that the only person? What else is going on? Maybe that selling cycle could have been a lot shorter as well. So sometimes we go for the obvious and think seniority or hierarchy is going to push things over the line. It's not often that case.
Yeah, no, I do think there's always a constant risk, and I think this shows this. You do not having quite completed discovery, I suspect. You find the person who really likes what you have, you push that person, but that alone might not be quite enough. And so I think it's I think we'd all struggle with that. It's hard to not go to the end when it looks like you've got the thing. Which gives me with a bit of a transition for our next piece of data slide, which is around sort of the skills requirements in this day and age. Obviously, that's what we're about at Insight Revenue as well. So this data is again from buyers rather. We ask them about the salespeople they encounter, and we ask them to tell us, how they rate them, and it's from a list of sort of predictive competencies that we've developed over the years. And the ones at the left are the ones they think that sellers do rather well. And it's interesting. Top there is managing the relationship. So that's that's being conscientious, responsive, and accountable, I would say roughly. And 40% would say that actually it's strong or often or usually a strength. Now, you could argue you might want to see that as like closer to 80-90%. Nonetheless, it's a relative strength. I think it gets to the ease point. The second one is a little bit controversial. I'd like to get your thoughts on it. So buyers think that salespeople are actually really good at negotiating, relatively speaking. And I know I've never met a salesperson who thought this was true. They always feel outgunned and under the gun. And so I'd love to get your response to that one in particular. What's your sense?
I'd agree. We always feel people on the other end are much sharper, tougher, but maybe we underestimate what they think about us as well. Because they're difficult conversations, aren't they? They can be tough conversations. So, and I guess in successful negotiations, both parties don't quite get what they want, right? It does. So I'm surprised at that because at the end of the day, certainly if you're selling into dominant healthcare systems, that you do as a seller feel they have all the power. But maybe we should take confidence from this as well. That we're probably not that bad either.
That's exactly what comes to mind, Pinder, is while it's a surprise, we should be using it to our advantage to say, you're actually, you have more power and skill than you think you do. So don't hesitate to, whether it be, stand strong on a certain stance or whatever. But I think that's what I take away from this, is that we can have a little bit more confidence than we do today in our job in negotiating prices.
That was our takeaway. I mean, what we see, if you have a good implementation plan and a large number of people have committed to something happening by X date, well, if you don't complete the purchase, the person in charge of it might actually be in deep trouble. And my suspicion is that's actually where a lot of this comes from, because your buyer needs your supply. And I do think that's something to never forget.
The only thing I'd say, Timur, is the way I look at it is 31% isn't very high score, right? So we can take confidence on one side, but equally, it's not 50-60% or so. So
no, that is a little bit like the sort of the unstated observation. It is rare, I think, that buyers are blown away. But but it's the last four bars, I think, where the real opportunity lies, and those are sort of the behaviors you want to replicate with people. Um, and it's like, roughly speaking, it's like working with people to build the business case. We saw, I think, that goes into building trust, supplying expert technical advice. I'm going to come back to that one in a second to get your thoughts on it. I think that's actually newish. And then, on a similar vein, it's like identifying ways of delivering additional value. That too, I think, gets to sort of understanding, not just the thing, but how is this going to work into the ecosystem. Um, and then, bit of a perennial, sadly, like that delivering insights. And that remains a persistent weakness. But let me go back quickly to the expert one. I'm saying, over the years, because I've run versions of this. This one, I think, is becoming more and more of a need in complex B2B, where the buyers, I think, really do look to the sales force to supply them with some of the advice they need. And my question is really two-part. Why do you think that might be true, and how have you variously accounted for this or remediated for this?
I mean, so in our world, I think because the seller is, maybe they've had the opportunity to perform the tasks or services that are being sold, but they aren't today, right? And so I think bringing in an expert who is doing this on a day-to-day basis and continues to be, relevant with knowledge and expertise, I think that can, bring some strength to the conversation for the seller. But I know as a buyer, I want to be talking to people who are doing this on a day-to-day basis of whatever service or product I'm buying. And I think that then requires somebody other than the seller, right, in and of itself.
Yeah, look, my take on the last four bars here is, this is really where the competitive advantage is for any organization, given how low the scoring is. But if you looked at another dimension, which is how important is it to the buyers, then offering unique insights, adding value, additional ways. These are highly valuable, areas that a buyer is signaling, and yet we're poor at it as an industry. So that the piece around supplying expert and technical advice, I think that just underlines for me, the buyer wants to know, do you understand my reality, right? Do you understand what I do and the area that I do it in, right? And so because they'll take credibility and confidence that they're sat in front of somebody who knows what they do and can give a reasonable level of technical advice, either themselves or, as Kristen says, you pull in the appropriate person, right? So there's a credibility that you need to gain. And so I think that's fundamentally important. Training is really key, or having the right team infrastructure to make sure that the right people are going in at the right time. I remember my days in the medical device sector and in the orthopedic world, where surgeons would, if a new seller was in front of them, they would ask some really sometimes basic but sometimes difficult questions around their area of orthopedics, the device, because what they're testing is, does this person know what they should know? Because am I going to buy off somebody who really doesn't, I don't have any confidence in? And once you get over that hurdle, right, then at least you can start forming some level of relationship. So I think it's fundamental, but clearly room for improvement.
Yeah. Kristen, I imagine that's particularly acute in your world, where there often is a science problem to be solved.
Yeah. The other thing I guess I would add as well to what Pinder said of the last four is I see those things as being, and they shouldn't be, but I think they're seen as maybe above and beyond extra effort, right? So it's taking time in the selling process. It's taking the time to do that, to do these things, to research more, talk to more people, do some more, reflection. in order to provide things that fall in these last four categories, especially the unique insights, right? I mean, that's really where it takes you putting yourself in the buyer's shoes, truly understanding all of their issues and concerns that they have with the buying process, and bringing them those unique insights that maybe somebody else wouldn't. But I see that those last four columns as being just truly taking the extra time in the selling process to do those things.
Yeah, that's at that point, let me risk talking about the thing everybody wants to talking about is how do you see AI playing into this? Because in some ways, the large language models, what they really excel at is sort of summarizing things and appearing to tell you what you would like to hear. So I'm curious, are you seeing it being used? Do you see salespeople needing to work more and more with these models?
Look, I think we're all using AI to a certain extent to summarize, and there's nothing wrong with that to get a starting point. I think the danger would be to leave it at that, because it's not always that what you think, or the accuracy may not be there. And if you're relying on the easy way to summarize and go in, you might be wide of the mark, and so you need to complement that with really understanding the system that you're going to sell into, talking to people in the system, talking to others, and so I think you still need to do that just to sanity check it and fine tune. I'll give you a great example. This is clearly in the days before AI. In the wound care market, I worked for a company called Smith and Nephew, and it's an advanced medical device used in this instance on cesarean sections. And particular hospital that the seller went into got very little, got some support from the clinician, but not from the procurement teams, because the cost was something like $350 US compared to a dressing, which is a fraction of the cost. But what the seller did to get the unique insight, they read up on the hospital board papers that are publicly available, looked at local data on infection rates, bed occupancy, capacity issues, and armed with that, went in with a unique insight. Having read the board papers, the situation the hospital it was in was very embarrassing, because women who were expecting their babies were being diverted to another hospital, a neighbouring hospital, because the beds were full because they had high infection rates of various wounds. So that level of diligence on a local healthcare system enabled a much richer conversation based on local insight as to what was important to the clinician, but also to the executive suite as well. And it changed the relationship between procurement and the clinician. So by all means, use AI as a great starting point, but curiosity and hard work and really getting the insight is important. And I think you can systemize this a little bit further than relying on individual sellers all the
time. I couldn't agree with you more, Pinder. I think it's using AI as a great starting point, or a contributing factor, but certainly not the only thing that should be used or and presented to a customer. So I wish I had it when I was back in college, but I definitely wouldn't only submit that as my final paper, right? I would use it to bring insights that perhaps I hadn't already considered, and that would be it. But certainly, I think relying on it wholeheartedly, I think is not the right direction, or not the right way to be using it.
Yeah. So are you seeing buyers using it?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard of certainly healthcare systems look at the way they will use data and AI to look at variations across localities. So more and more, I think this is going to be utilized, as data and AI more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And in particular, I think where we're already seeing it quite a bit is, in the start and eventual completion of legal documents, whether it be, master services agreements or confidentiality agreements or things like that. Now, it's taken a lot less time to have to work through those documents. So that's where I see there's, already been a benefit in the selling process.
Yeah, that's interesting because there's a lot of, and the reason I ask some of the questions is there's a lot of hypothesis that sales is one of those professions that is most likely to be transformed by AI. My sense is probably not, because I don't think AI can negotiate between multiple stakeholders. But what's your perspective on it? It also can't, it's also not liable for anything, so it can't really give you advice.
Yeah, and I from my own experience, I would just say the amount of stuff that it still gets wrong, I think, scares me into saying that it's replacing humans at this point, right? So either it has to get better, or we just will continue to use it as we do now, which is as a tool, right? But not the method of actually how we sell. So I guess I would add that in.
Yeah. That's interesting. So something to improve those four things if you use it diligently. But the risk is if you use it superficially, you might lose all credibility.
Exactly.
Well, with that, I wanted to. That's sort of the end of our, the formal questions. Wanted to see if we got any questions from LinkedIn.
One that I have is, so we've talked a couple times about curiosity, and Pinder, you've said it. How do you either look for curiosity in your sales team, train curiosity in your sales team, and coach curiosity in your sales team?
Really, really good question, Becky. Let me answer by, I think we've seen a real shift in what organizations have been looking for from sellers. I think years ago, it was heavy on relationships, interpersonal skills, relationship forming. And by the way, that's still important. I'm not saying that's fine. You still kind of need that, right? But I think the shift now has gone to, we've got individuals who, what's their analytical capability like, right? So curiosity is clearly different, but what's the analytical capability like? I think increasingly we're seeing, if we look at good sellers, then their analytical capability is much, much higher. And I also think we're looking at people who can work as a team. And we've all heard of great salespeople who are the lone wolves, but we're looking for team players, because sometimes building a map of what's going on in a geography is a team effort and is a collaborative effort between different team members. But the curiosity, I think you can, have we systemized it in organizations I've been on? I don't think we have. But I think you can look at the kind of questions you can pose to the individual, things that they've done, examples of previous work. Because if you're new in a geography and you want to keep abreast of the changing stakeholder environment, requires a level of curiosity and hard work. Right? And I think, you can flesh that out to a certain extent in the kind of questions that you're asking of individuals. But I'm not sure I've cracked it. I wouldn't want to claim that, but I think there's worth putting definitely worth putting effort behind that.
Yeah, I would add to that as well that I think with sellers in particular, they follow the money. And I think if they see people around them who are being successful in their role, they often want to say, how is it that you're as successful as you are? So I think using good examples around them of other sellers that are curious by nature, maybe, helps, drive home the message that, being curious can really, help unlock opportunities that you didn't know that existed, right? And hit your plan eventually. So I think, making sure that you highlight success around the organization and how that it was achieved, I think is also another good way to help coach people, on the selling team.
I also think we can process this to a certain extent. And what I mean by that is, certainly in life sciences, a lot of organizations have a centralized model where global marketing will produce the campaign, the features, the clinical features and benefits, and the brochure, if you like, which is useful. And you do need that, don't get me wrong. But it's features led. But we're talking about selling into a system where we need to know a whole lot more, right? We need to know a whole lot more about what's going on. So I think you can process that by, the local teams really looking at, and I do think it's a team effort between seller, the marketing people, maybe the market access people, the clinical folks, really asking the questions of each other around, okay, what do we know? Who does what? So I think if the individual doesn't have it, through the teamwork and the process, you can prompt that curiosity and for people to go out and find things. So to a certain extent, you can systemize it. But if you have got more curious people, then you know what? It will just make it all go faster.
It happens a little bit more organically.
Agreed.
Kristen, certainly what we found in some of your sessions, when we brought in the experts, that really changed the conversation.
Yeah.
Well, wanted to thank you both very, very much for this. In terms of for some concluding remarks, hopefully we sort of managed to land on this in terms of the things that you the things you absolutely need to get right. And what Insight Revenue is devoted to here is start by understanding the customer strategy. The default, I think, Pinder, you said, is only going to be about 80% right. Then there's a lot of hard work to be done around discovery. Then it's really around, what are the things that are going to make a difference and open up somebody's thinking? And that could just be facts. It could be things around, factors that they sort of know about but don't know how important it is. And sometimes it's actually going to be transformative. I think the wound care example you gave was a great one. They knew it was a better wound care system. They didn't really appreciate that it was going to actually open up a lot of capacity and save them a ton of money. Bringing that home makes all the difference. And then it's collaborating with people and coaching people through the change management process. And my hope is these are all very teachable, replicable behaviors. These are not sort of, they do require some talent, but I don't think it's primarily a matter of being able to do these things innately. So I'd love to get your final thoughts on that.
Well, from my point of view, absolutely. But what you do need is I think, firstly, just an organizational understanding. We're going to make a shift from just selling on, say, features to actually understanding the system and what goes on in that system. And that's an important shift because that then does require some level of resource to, have you got the right insights team? Are we bringing the right teams together to run a process, like this, to process it and systemize it and work? So if you don't make that shift in the first place and think, well, we've got the global campaign and whatever that is will roll out, then I think you're missing a massive opportunity. So there's a mind shift change that organizations need to make to say we need to understand the system, we're going to develop the right resources and run the right processes and the teams. And clearly, alongside that, where capability is required to look at how do we build or buy that capability.
I would definitely agree with that. And I guess just going back to the, AI part of the conversation, not just AI, but digital transformation in and of itself and availability of information, right? So utilizing more data and information in the selling process, I think is, we can do more of that now than we could, 5-10 years ago for sure. So not only in our, how successful we are, but also in the training of our sales staff, and I think that that's also an important piece that as you look at these, 6 steps across the way, there's now data available to all of us that maybe wasn't before, or, available in a faster way that can help process, make this more of a concrete process and steps that you follow versus yesterday.
No, that's brilliant. So again, thank you all very much. We're sort of pretty much up at our hour. Thank you for everybody who joined the conversation, and yeah, look forward to continuing the conversation.